The big story tonight, we're focusing on that 3-month logging ban and the state of our forest cover in this country. Dr. Isaac Kalua and Benson Ocheng both still with me on the show. Dr. Kalua, let me get to you real quick to understand something that Benson had alluded to before we took the break, that we need to understand the root causes and some of the systemic failures we have in the management of our forest cover and therefore environmental conservation. You're the expert here. What have been the root causes? We know that it's political. We know charcoal making is big business. But there's also some of the things that are interesting in terms of our management of it. You know, water and irrigation being handled by different ministries, KWS and the Forest Service being in different ministries despite the fact that they do the same work. Do you see some of these as challenges in terms of managing our forests in the country?
There have been challenges. The good thing is that that has been noticed, and that is why we now have an organization called the Kenya Water Towers Agency. When you look at what causes some of these things, people are looking for water in the forest, people are looking for firewood, they're looking for their energy, people are, the forests are being affected because of overgrazing, because of our production of beef, which we need to improve and deal with it in a better way out of our livelihoods. We are getting forest fires. And then one of the major issues is the fact that we have multi-agencies, and then sometimes there is some uncoordinated kind of an issue. When you talk about our forest resources and our natural resources in these areas, we do have institutions like WARMA, we do have Kenya Forest Service, we have the Kenya Wildlife Service, we do have the county governments, we do have the ministries that, you know, there are like 10 different institutions. And the coordinating factor is what somehow has been lacking. And when it came in, there was that goodwill that would have been required, and also the fact that there was discomfort in some way until people now started realizing that there's actually the need of synergizing activities. So this is one of the things. And then lack of discussion with the communities, engaging the communities to understand what it is that they want. Because if you talk about forest fires, this is something that many Kenyans may not have known, in 2015 we lost about 30,000 hectares of Mau forest out of fire, most of which was actually deliberately lit by the community, because the process that was engaged in this place, then you find that people are not engaged. You attacked their prayer places. They also feel maybe they are not being involved in terms of getting and harnessing from the resources that are easily available. Small things. Of course, there are fires in Mount Kenya and other areas where you find there is a big issue where people are not communicating. The double allocation of the double gazettement of forests between the Kenya Wildlife and also the Kenya Forest Service, causing internal conflicts within organizations. When you talk about Shimba Hills, Kenya Forest Service planted trees in the 1960s, and the Kenya Wildlife Service eventually found that the trees that were planted, even though they were not indigenous, they were to be harvested at a particular time, eventually animals and wildlife started living there, and they became a natural habitat. And then it comes a time where the Kenya Forest Service feels that this is time now to harvest the trees. And the Kenya Wildlife Service says, no, this cannot happen. This has happened in that place in Shimba Hills. It has also happened in some part of Mount Kenya Forest. And you find these conflicts are very negative to the resources that are easily available for us to harness. And therefore, again, the issues on the EIA, you find that one institution, NEMA, has taken...
That, for the purpose of our viewers, Dr. Kalua, environmental impact assessment?
Yes.
Yeah, just so that they can
yes,
follow.
Environmental impact assessment.
Yeah.
You find that the National Environmental Management Authority feels that there needs to be a specific area impact assessment done in this specific place. But then the Kenya Forest Service feels it should be a strategic or a general ecosystem environmental management, environmental impact assessment. And again, you see now, when you talk about a wholesome kind of ecosystem management, it may lead to some indulgence in terms of harvesting the wood in a specific area, affecting the flow of water in these specific areas. And these are institutions that actually went to court to go and you can imagine two government institutions going to court.
Right.
And therefore, these are the issues that we are coming from. And I believe that a solution now has been found. And above all, I must be honest to myself and Kenyans also, that the drive that the minister seems to be having, and I believe it is going to be sustained, is what we have always needed in this ministry, and therefore it's going to be able to Kenyans are going to be able to see a change. But again.
All right, I'd just like to pause there for a minute so that we can bring in Mercy Karubitu from the Green Belt Movement, who's joining us on phone. Mercy, good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight on the show. Your quick reaction to the 3-month ban, including the fact that members of parliament in that committee in parliament now urging a total ban on logging. What are your thoughts?
Thank you so much. It's an honor for the Green Belt Movement to speak in this panel. It's unfortunate I cannot join you live, but I'm happy to give my views on phone. And it is very, very important that we support the ban that was declared on Saturday with the CS, Environment and Forestry. It is for the welfare of Kenyans, and we are talking about almost 6 million Kenyans who are depending on these forest ecosystem. And the things that have been happening on these forested mountains are very sudden. And the outcry is an indication that something somewhere is wrong. And we need to correct it. And we also say, the CS also says that the time he's been given 3 months is not enough. It needs to extend is needed, and he will extend, and we support that. We need enough time to assess the issue.
Okay, so
we are talking about 5 water towers that are key in terms of water supply, in terms of agriculture. We also support energy, and therefore it is very, very important. If there is need to extend the ban, I know it will be for everything.
All right, so the phone line is a little unclear, but from what you're saying is there is a need to extend the ban?
If need be, if they will not have, you know what, the reason why we have the ban, if we want first of all to stop the damage. While we assess, while the task force assess the situation, where are the gaps, what are the actions that need to be taken. But I think it is important. If that is if they feel a total ban is important, we will support.
Okay, so my final question to you then would be, with respect to a total ban, some would say then that would leave us, because the exercise would be to plant trees, harvest, plant, reharvest, that we would end up with old forests with no young trees, and it's not like we have any more space in the country to dedicate to that. So what are your thoughts around a total ban? And considering that lots of people depend on fuel wood, are there any alternatives that are being, given to residents?
What I would say is we have many alternatives on the table. And we have to stop believing the only place where we can get firewood, where we can get timber from, is in our forested mountains, in our water catchment areas. We have planted so many trees on our farms. We have a lot of farm forestry that has been happening, and we have history for the Green Belt Movement since 1977. We have been empowering communities to plant trees on their farms.
Yeah.
And for the time being, we have enough sources of timber that we can supply. But what I want to bring to your attention is the budget we have from harvesting timber from the forest is 2.8 billion.
Okay.
we have to supply water, if we have no water at all from the water catchment area, and if we have to supply water to Kenyans, and we are talking of 6 million, building one dam is 20 billion.
Okay.
That is a lot of resources.
All right.
So we rather look for alternative sources to give the country a feedback, but we don't want to be thinking about how do we supply water to Kenya. If there is none,
Okay.
it's coming to our country. And you know,
All right. Got you.
it's coming from the mountain. It's
Yeah.
3 million of things.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Mercy Karubitu. The line is a little unclear, but we thank you very much for joining us from the Greenbelt Movement. Benson Ocheng, there's a big percentage of people, same question that I posed to Mercy. What policies are there to enable alternative sources of fuel to be more affordable or to regulate the same as well? I mean, environmental conservation issues require a lot of public participation. Do you think there's been enough of this, or does more need to be done?
Well, it is normally difficult when you get into the domain of participation. What kind of participation is enough? But definitely we know that in this country, this is a fairly new kid on the blocks, as it were. The 2010 Constitution is very clear that it is one of the values of governance that public officers or of conducting business in this country, or that binds public officers in the conduct of public duty. Article 10 is very clear on that. There are mechanisms in the constitutions requiring all Kenyans to participate in public decision making. But I think with respect to conservation, we haven't had enough of this. It is something new. But let me hasten to add, we have a fairly new legislation, the Forest Conservation and Management Act 2016, which also borrows this or adopts this same principle of public participation. Community forestry is an important part and parcel of forest management approach in this country. Remember that in the categories of forest, the law even envisages that we would have community forests. Those are forests on public land, on land that belongs to communities. But back to your question, I think now the law is settled, very clear, supported by the Constitution, incorporated in other legislation, and not just the forest law, it is also there in the Environment Management and Coordination Act, and it is also there in Forest Conservation and Management Act.
Okay.
So what is required of us now is to live to these principles, ensure, as Dr. said, that when we conduct public affairs, especially the ones of this nature that we are talking about, ones that affect communities directly, you are talking of firewood, you are talking of access to water, we are talking of daily livelihood needs, of which are underpinned by forests and our natural resources, then participation is key.
It's key, it's important. There's a question here on Twitter. The hashtag is the big story. At Nyalik says, how about farmers who have their own woodlots? This is an impediment to farm forestry. Dr. Kalua, I know you have something to say about this. What happens to farm forestry? What are your thoughts?
Again, these are some of the things that will be discussed in the committee that has come up, because it's a wholesome ban. I believe it definitely affects the wood industry, and therefore it's something that it will be very clear from the minister's office how far the ban goes, how far it is in terms of the period. And what is exciting is Kenyans. I remember one chair of water, Mr. Chepsoi, calling to say, this ban, I should say to the minister, it should be banned forever. And there are alternatives. And therefore, the feeling of Kenyans is that really there is what is known that must be done. And within the 14 days, the good thing is that this, I believe, is not just any other task force. And I want to assure Kenyans the confidence that I have seen in the minister in achieving this, the role of Kenya Water Towers being embedded to ensure, because we now have a recommendation that with 20 clear and actionable recommendation within which can be dealt with at the parliament, and I believe this will be a document that can be discussed by the task force. As I said, I cannot speak about the task force because it has just happened, but I think the issue about the private woodlots, this is where we need to take our country to, because we should take it as a business. There are countries with forest cover over 60%, 50%, and therefore we should treat it, and part of the recommendations, I believe, at the right time, and even at the Kenya Water Towers, we have recommended that we should make it a business, sustainable business, because wood and timber industry is huge.
Yes, you're right.
Earning quite a lot,
big.
and therefore that's where we are supposed
Allow
to
me to interject, because you talked about several alternatives that are there. We have little time left. Benson, let me ask you this. We talk about alternatives that are present, but to what extent are people allowed the opportunity to do that? I'll give you an example with the banning of plastics in the country. A lot of Kenyans felt there wasn't enough time to enable them to move into the alternatives. Many of them are now paying for some of those alternatives when they go shopping, when they go to the market. That wasn't the case before. Do we sometimes put the cart before the horse when we introduce a ban? For example, if we say we're banning logging forever, then those alternatives, will they be, one, affordable, accessible, and available to Kenyans?
Well, there will be always points when we as a people will have to sacrifice some things. And I think realizing the dire consequences or situation in which we are, I think we cannot postpone the issue of ban on logging or on harvesting of timber. But one must add that what is then required is to assist communities to achieve what their daily livelihood needs in terms of access to fuel wood and, of course, raising alternatives. And there is great opportunity here for business and for even conservation in private forestry. And I think the law, the act that I talked about, also encourages that there would be private forests. And this is where there is a very clear delineation of duty between county governments and, of course, national government. In this particular case, in the forestry sector represented by the Kenya Forest Service. If you read the law, it envisages a situation of seamless collaboration and cooperation between the national government and county government in enhancing forestry and in ensuring that we achieve the 10% forest cover. So if there is a goodwill, and it is good that we have a new minister who is very motivated and is taking the bull by the horn, at least in this respect. If we invest properly and we take account of all the opportunities we are talking about, ensuring public participation, getting Kenyans on board, through various mechanisms that are already provided in the law, because community conservation through Forest Users Association is also envisaged in the Act. And these are all opportunities that we need to harness. Let me just hasten to add, the issue of streamlining responsibilities between different institutions in the natural resource sector is one that we have to deal with decisively and squarely. Because even as you are mentioning access to wood fuel, you will realize that the bulk of this is envisaged under the Energy Act rather than under the Forest Act. And so you will find different regulations and mechanisms in place seeking, hopefully, to work towards the same end, but rarely converging seamlessly into what we desire. And I think whatever the committee does, ways should be found to streamline these functions to avoid these unnecessary conflicts among institutions. And lastly, to put our money where our mouth is. Today we are talking of forest ban, the budget will come, and you will find very little, if any, budgetary allocations to this. These things need human capital and other resources to invest to ensure that the ban is enforced and that we get to the desired end.
Okay, Benson Ocheng, thank you. Dr. Kalua, 1 minute, your final thoughts. So after 90 days, what next?
Let me pick it up from where Benson has left it. Putting money where our mouth is. We recently went to Mount Kenya. We found 30,000 acres of land being manned by only 8 officers. This is not, it cannot ever work. We need to get the parliament to kindly allocate resources to to Kenya Forest Service. These guys are suffering in silence, and also the management to be able to be supported. This is a reality that must be worked on. When we ban, we also expect alternative fencing poles to be available for fencing. We also expect other alternatives to come in as we clear our plastic in this region. When you see a governor like Ngilu talk about banning charcoal, when you see a governor like Tunai talking about charcoal burning, it means that this is the direction that Kenya is going. And for sure, we have now started understanding, at least it's not Kalua, it's not other people who are talking about this, it is the opposite, the people who have now started suffering out of this and creating alternatives. CFS, you find that the community forest associations, some of them, and not all, some of them have been created so that the chair, the treasurer, the officials are one family member. We need to change this so that it is community participation.
I see.
In a place like eThekwini, the municipality in South Africa, they created an alternative way that involves mwananchi, so that if you notice a leaking pipe somewhere in the city or wherever, you report about that specific action and you get food from one of the fast foods. Can we create this kind of activity so that there is value with the institutions that are there? Because it's our responsibility.
All right, that's all the time we have for, but certainly we could discuss this for hours on end. It's an important subject in the country and one that has our attention in every way. Dr. Isaac Kalua, we thank you for your time. We wish you all the very best within the next 14 days, and we hope you will be available to speak with us once your task force is done and has presented its report. We look forward to that. My many thanks as well to Benson Ocheng, who's an environmental lawyer, Mercy Karubitu, who spoke to us from the Greenbelt movement. Asanteni sana. I'm Yvonne Okwara Matole. That's the big story tonight. Up next, Ben Kit.